Kash Patel and Hillary Clinton were not standing in the same room when the confrontation took shape. That is what made it feel so strange. There was no hearing table, no split screen, no live exchange where one of them could point across the stage and demand an answer. Instead, there was a release, a declassification, a set of documents brought back into public life under dramatic circumstances and attached once again to the oldest wound in Trump-era politics. Russia? That was enough. Because by the time Kash Patel emerged as one of the loudest public faces around the revived Durham Annex, the fight was no longer just about paperwork. It was about whether Hillary Clinton would once again be cast as the hidden architect of a national fraud, whether the Trump coalition could relitigate the entire Russia story in reverse, and whether old conspiracy energy could be upgraded into something that sounded a little more official simply because it arrived through declassification and the language of intelligence. That is where the Patel-Clinton confrontation really lives. Not in direct dialogue, but in the transformation of accusation into state-adjacent narrative. When the Justice Department and the CIA transmitted the newly declassified Durham Appendix to Senator Chuck Grassley in July 2025, the move was framed by Trump allies as a major disclosure. Grassley said it shed new light on a supposed Clinton campaign plan to tie Trump to Russia. Trump allies immediately began speaking as though the documents did not merely raise questions about the origins of the Russia investigation, but confirmed that Clinton's side had knowingly built a false collusion narrative as political cover. That is where Kash Patel became so important. Patel was not just another commentator. By that point, he had become one of the most recognizable public carriers of the argument that the Trump-Russia investigation was not merely flawed, but the product of a corrupt political and intelligence operation. He understood the emotional structure of the story better than almost anyone in Trump world. He knew that for millions of conservatives, Russiagate was not history. It was unfinished grievance. It was proof that the system had been weaponized against Trump and then never fully confessed what it had done. So when the annex returned to public life, Patel did not treat it as dry archival material. He treated it as vindication energy. And Hillary Clinton, whether she wanted to re-enter that battlefield or not, became the target again. That is what gives this pair its charge. Clinton has long occupied a unique role in American political imagination. She is not only a former Secretary of State and presidential nominee, she is, for the right, the central figure in a long moral theater about elite impunity, institutional protection, and the belief that Democrats play by a different set of rules. The moment her name is fused back to a declassified intelligence appendix and the claim that she approved or encouraged a plan to attach Trump to Russia, the whole emotional machine turns back on. That machine does not need a courtroom. It only needs permission. And the annex, whatever its actual evidentiary strength, it provided precisely that kind of permission because it arrived wrapped in the authority of official release. That matters. People hear declassified appendix differently than they hear old theory or campaign talking point. The phrase sounds like hidden truth emerging from behind a locked door. It sounds like the state finally revealing what the state once concealed. Patel understood that symbolic power instantly, but the deeper tension in the Patel-Clinton story comes from the fact that the annex did not settle the matter cleanly at all. Trump allies treated it as proof. Critics and multiple legal observers treated it as something far murkier, and in some cases warning that the underlying material itself had serious credibility problems and reflected dubious Russian-sourced intelligence that Durham had not treated as cleanly reliable in the first place. That ambiguity is the key, because Patel's political strength in moments like this is that he speaks through ambiguity as though it were already moral certainty. He does not sound like a lawyer still weighing a messy record. He sounds like someone translating hidden corruption into plain English for a public that has grown tired of euphemism. That is a powerful voice if your audience already believes the institutions lied to them once and might be lying again. And it is precisely the kind of voice that Hillary Clinton has always struggled against in the populist age. Clinton speaks the language of institutions, process, one in elite competence whether she intends to or not. Even when she is sarcastic or sharp, she carries the burden of having long been treated as the emblem of managerial power, insider networks, and a political class that many Americans do not trust. That means accusations against her need not be fully proved to be politically dangerous. They only need to feel legible inside a public mythology that already exists. That is why the Patel-Clinton confrontation is so much bigger than one annex. It is about the collision between two opposite symbolic roles. Patel is the insurgent translator of hidden state grievance. Clinton is the perennial avatar of establishment immunity. When those two roles lock onto the same set of documents, the factual dispute is real, but the emotional dispute is even larger. And Patel's audience wants a world in which the annex finally confirms what they believed all along. The Russia scandal was not just a mistake or overreach, but a dirty political project in which Clinton's side helped engineer the lie. Clinton's defenders and many mainstream analysts want the public to see something else, an effort to use declassification theater and contested intelligence to rewrite the history of 2016 and reframe Russian election interference as if it were just a smear invented by Democrats. Those are not small differences of emphasis. Those are entirely different moral universes. And Patel is effective because he knows how to speak as though the moral universe he inhabits is the only one grounded in courage. He does not ask the public to dwell in uncertainty. He asks it to recognize that uncertainty itself was often the shield used by powerful institutions to avoid admitting what they had done. In that frame, declassification is not a technical act. It is liberation. It is proof that the secret archive was always going to tell the truth eventually, if only enough loyal people could pry it open. That is why the burn bag, hidden room, appendix language mattered so much in the broader rollout. It was not just information, it was atmosphere. Atmosphere is everything in this kind of confrontation. The more the story sounds like something buried, hidden, or nearly destroyed, the easier it becomes to cast the target as someone who survived for years behind layers of institutional protection. Hillary Clinton, as a political symbol, fits that atmosphere perfectly in the minds of her critics. She is already imagined as someone whose world knows how to bury, delay, or reframe scandal. Patel did not have to invent that mythology. He only had to reactivate it. And that reactivation tells you something important about where American politics is now. Old fights no longer die. They wait in document rooms, in annexes, in committee releases, in interviews, in memoirs, in selective disclosures, in the next administration's appetite for relitigation. The country keeps circling the same symbolic battlefields because the participants are bigger than the evidence. Clinton and Patel do not simply represent opposing interpretations of a file. They represent opposing answers to a deeper question. Was Trump the victim of a political intelligence operation? Or was the system in fact trying, however imperfectly, and to confront a real pattern of troubling connections and foreign interference? Patel wants the first answer to sound morally complete. Clinton's side needs the public to resist that completion. That is why the clash matters, because it is not just about the past. It is about what kind of state narrative the public is now willing to accept. If declassified but disputed material can be narrated as final proof of a Clinton-directed plot, then the entire meaning of Russiagate shifts for a large part of the country. It stops being a story about a flawed investigation into real foreign interference and becomes a story about elite fabrication aimed at destroying Trump. That is not a minor reframing. It is a total inversion, and that inversion is the real product. Patel understands that the fight over archives is never only archival. Wait, it is about authority over memory. Who gets to tell the country what really happened? Who gets to decide whether the Russia years stand as a cautionary tale about Trump and Moscow, or a cautionary tale about Clinton, the FBI, intelligence agencies, and the political use of national security narratives? That is why Patel's confrontation with Clinton has so much force despite lacking a face-to-face scene. He is not really confronting her as an individual in a room. He is confronting the entire Clinton-era claim to moral seriousness, legality, and institutional legitimacy. And Clinton, by virtue of who she is, becomes the person in whom that whole claim is concentrated. The annex gave Patel something he values deeply, a document structure through which grievance could sound investigative. That is the most important phrase in this story, grievance sounding investigative. It is the engine of modern political narrative. It does not eliminate facts. It arranges them inside a stronger moral demand. The demand is simple. Tell the country that what it suspected all along was true. But truth in these clashes is rarely clean. That is why the story persists, because there is enough material, enough official texture, enough historic mistrust, enough partisan appetite, and enough symbolic hatred to keep the conflict alive even when the underlying evidentiary debate remains complicated. Clinton's problem has always been that complication rarely saves you when your critics are telling a simpler and more emotionally coherent story. Patel's strength is that he never lets the story become emotionally incoherent for his side. He makes it feel like the facts are converging even when the record remains contested. He offers not just argument, but closure. That is what millions of people wanted from the annex. Closure. Closure that the system really was rigged against Trump. Closure that Clinton's orbit really was behind a historic deception. Closure that the institutions really were too compromised to police themselves honestly. Whether the annex genuinely supports that closure in full is one question. Whether Patel can make it feel like it does is another. And in politics, the second question often decides what the public remembers. That is why this confrontation will endure, because it sits at the center of one of the longest unresolved disputes in modern American life. Not simply what happened in 2016, but what Americans are supposed to believe about the institutions that told them what 2016 meant. Patel says those institutions hid the real scandal, and Clinton was closer to its center than the public was allowed to know. Clinton's defenders say the whole exercise is another attempt to launder dubious material into an emotionally satisfying myth. The country hears both, and because the country never resolved its trust crisis in the first place, both narratives find fertile ground. That is why Kash Patel versus Hillary Clinton matters now. Not because they exchange words, not because one document ended the argument, but because the fight over Russia, memory, and official truth found its perfect symbolic combatants once again. The man who speaks grievance like revelation, and the woman whose name still carries everything the grievance wants to punish.